Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Mech Lab, where we try to be a better mech commander every day. Today we're talking about a concept that you will see in a lot of discussions about Battlemechs, and that is the Battletech Triangle. Now, the idea is that no mech can have maximum stats in all three. Some mechs are going to lean more towards offense, some are going to lean more towards defense. So you have your three main points of a mech, and that is offense, which is going to be your weapons as well as how much melee damage that you can deal. Mobility, which allows you to move around the map and create a high target movement modifier, as well as things like jump jets and just high movement speed in general, as well as specialist abilities such as running over water like hover tanks can, or the ability to fly like a VTOL. Defense is going to cover stuff like ECM, as well as your armor and structure, and then any other special things that you have on top of that, like Battlemech shields, different types of armor like Feral Dammar. This also incorporates your engine as well. Having a light engine is less durable than having a standard engine, for example. Now, as you can see here, I've listed a few of the key roles that mechs can have. So, for example, here in the center, we have mechs that have a really good balance between mobility, offense, and defense. These are usually going to be your heavy mechs, like, say, a grasshopper that is reasonably mobile, but still has good armor and good weaponry. So a griffin is another good example, as is the wolverine, as is the shadowhawk, although the shadowhawk, I would say, is a little bit too much of a generalist. Usually these designs are going to have a set range bracket that they're good at. The wolverine is more of a close range fighter, whereas the griffin's a long range fighter. The shadowhawk is the ultimate generalist, which makes it sort of weak in both areas. Next, we have our juggernauts. These could be anything from a demolisher tank to a hunchback to these others that we've listed here, the direwolf, annihilator, and atlas. These are mechs that are heavy into the offense and defensive tree, but even more so in the defense. These are designs that have tons of armor, that have maximized armor, that are not particularly fast, and that have a lot of weaponry, but really don't emphasize mobility at all. These will not have jump jets, and they're typically going to be 3-5 or 4-6 movement brackets. Then we move over here to the glass cannons. The Hollander and the Jägermech come to mind. Something like a dervish is going to be even more in this sort of area, but not quite down with spiders, locusts, Hermes the Scout, flanker type mechs. These mechs do not really emphasize defense at all. They only really emphasize offense and some mobility. Sometimes the Hollander being, a 5'8", 35-ton mech. It's not particularly fast, but it can at least move somewhat. The Jägermech could have a 3-5 movement profile as a 65-tonner, but it goes for 4-6, so it's able to reposition, but it really doesn't prioritize defense in any way. It has shit armor, it has way too much ammo. A lot of later variants have XL engines. The whole Jägermech design philosophy is shoot them a lot and hope that we can take a couple of hits in return because we're staying far away. And then we're discouraging enemies from getting close to us by having a bunch of medium lasers. Next we'll move on to the scouts. These are mechs that are basically just really about going fast. The Spider 8-12-8 movement profile, very fast, can jump ridiculously far. One of the few mechs in the game that actually has a 10 jump with a later variant. The Locust, obviously 8-12, it has like a couple of small weapons on it. This thing is really just designed to move fast and sort of flank enemies, get behind them, exploit back armor. The Hermes is the same. These are mechs that you want almost purely because they are typically going to be really, really cheap. You can get very fast mechs on a bigger chassis, like a 45-tonner or 55-tonner, like the Wraith, for example, are scout flanker mechs, but they pay a premium in battle value that you don't pay for these smaller light mechs. And of course, they're going to have more offense and more defense than pure mobility. Looking at it now, really honestly, these should be right here in the corner. There's not really any, these have weapons, whereas if you just wanted pure mobility and utility, I suppose you would want something like an Ost Scout, and that would be down here in the almost pure mobility section. Ost Scout doesn't have a particularly large amount of armor, and usually has very paltry weapons. Despite being 35 tons, it's almost entirely up in this category right here, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Now, last we have the Brawler or Trooper. This is a mech that has a big threat in close. So the Thunderbolt, for example, has abrasive medium lasers as well as machine guns. The Battlemaster also just has a bristling amount of medium lasers. But the Trooper or Brawler is going to be able to engage at multiple ranges as well. Thunderbolt has an LRM-15 and a large laser. The Battlemaster has a PPC. These are mechs that have a lot of armor, that are a little bit more focused on mobility than the Juggernauts, and these are actually kind of interchangeable a little bit. You might even say that the Atlas is more of a brawler because it does have multiple range weapons. It has, you know, an LRM-20, it has some medium lasers, it has an AC-20, it has an SRM-6. It's mainly a very close range mech, but it does have that single LRM-20 to fire at long range, similar to the Battlemaster and the Thunderbolt. But these are your line mechs. They're generally going to be the mechs that want to move forward and engage the enemy at that medium to short range and screen your rear line mechs, like your Hollander and your Jaeger mech, from getting engaged by the enemy brawlers and troopers. Now, what do we have over here? We have basically what's missing from this chart, which is all of the utility things that mechs can do. Tags and spotting for other units, dropping off sensor beacons. The coolant truck is something that some people don't even know about. This thing can just spray coolant all over your mech and makes it so that you sink more heat, which can be really, really useful. If you've got a super hot mech that wants to be firing every turn, taking a coolant truck with it can be the winning combo that you need. It's very low on battle value. Now, for certain missions, you're going to need hands. You need to be able to carry things. Not every mech has hands. The Battlemaster and the Thunderbolt both have hands, as does the Spider and the Hermes, but the Locust doesn't. The Jaeger mech doesn't. The Direwolf doesn't. Now, that does also impact your offense stat a little bit as well, because it gives you a better ability to punch if you have hands. But then, of course, you have things like C3, which you kind of have to build a whole list around if you want C3 to work properly. I find that C3 costs a lot of battle value, and it's a little bit finicky to use. But it is still a good utility thing that you can have in the back of your mind. You know, maybe I can try and make a C3 list out of this. Command consoles. Really, really important thing to have. If you've got a command console in your mech, there's not many mechs that have them. One of the mechs that I really love is the Battlemaster 6C because it has one of these things. This, even in a match without quirks, can give you a +2 to initiative, which is huge. Also, we've got the command mech quirk. If you're playing with quirks, you can include that in there as well. Active probes can be really useful for certain missions, and it's also useful in something like City Tech or night fighting, things where you're not going to have the best line of sight on the enemy. Having active probes can really boost your sensors so much that it makes it way easier to see where the enemy is and what they're doing. And lastly, comms equipment goes with the command mech quirk and command consoles, gives you initiative bonuses. Now, having points in these kinds of things is obviously going to take even more points away from the other three major pillars. And you have to realize that not every mech can have all of these things. A 100-ton mech is never going to have the mobility that a 30-ton mech is going to have. But similarly, a 30-ton mech is never going to have the offense and defense that an Atlas does. Except that when we get into mobility and defense, they are intrinsically linked with one another. And similarly, mobility and offense are also actually linked with one another, because if you have short-range weapons, like small lasers, they're not particularly useful on something really slow like an Atlas. But a Spider who's able to get in close with them can really make good use of all those small lasers. Same with machine guns, medium pulse lasers, these kinds of things are all really great on something that's mobile and can get them into range quickly, but are kind of less good on something big like a Direwolf that has a lot of long-range weapons. It's basically only serving as point defense weaponry at that point, whereas a Wolverine or a Shadowhawk is going to be able to get those medium lasers or SRMs in and really really cause some havoc with. Now you look at something like the Battlemaster and Thunderbolt, though, and you immediately realize that, yeah, they have their big main weapons, or long-range weapons, that they use on the way in, but then really they're using those medium-range weapons, like the medium lasers, to serve the purpose of really dishing damage when they get in close. Now, on the other end of things, mobility and defense on a spider is going to be intrinsically linked because it might not have very much armor. If a single PPC hits most light mechs in the legs, it's going to penetrate and potentially immobilize that mech, which is really, really terrible. You never want that to happen, obviously. But if you're moving fast, you've got that plus 4 TMM from moving at least 10 when you sprint. I mean, it's going to be really hard to catch that mech. Or with a spider, I mean, it can jump from forest to forest, still getting that 4 TMM, and it's going to be really hard to hit it, which if you go and watch my battle value video, link is in the description, it will really show you why they give battle value the metrics that it has, because a mech with high mobility and defense is going to be really, really hard to bring down. It might not have that much offense, but it can still get in behind you, it can kick you, it can still hit you with high efficiency weapons like small lasers, medium lasers, things like that, and be really irritating and hard to bring down. Something like a 7-jump Griffin jumping back and forth between two forests while firing off a PPC and an LRM at you, having a 4 TMM and 2 defense from the heavy woods that it's in. It doesn't really matter if it's got 9s and 10s to hit you. It's still going to be annoying. It's still going to be a problem for you to try and have to deal with this stupid thing, because it's also fighting you at long range. So your medium range weapons, your pulse lasers and things that deal with high TMMs well aren't going to work. It's just too far away. It's going to keep kiting you. Even a standard Wolverine that's able to really exploit movement but has enough armor that it can take some hits, it's really hard to deal with because it has comparable firepower at close range to a Thunderbolt, but it's 10 tons less and a hell of a lot faster. So, general overview, you can kind of pick 2 of these and make a mech designed around them, or look for a mech that has those things in mind. The Atlas, offense and defense, pretty well balanced. Or you can go for a more balanced pick, something like a cavalry mech, like a Griffin or a Wolverine, something that can flank. It's not as fast as the scouts or flankers, but it's got more defense, it's got more weapons, it's a balanced machine that's going to basically do any job that you need it to. And you can also build a lance around this. You can build a miserable metal mountain list like what I had in the last tournament with the MRC, and you basically only have big, tough, heavy mechs. I had 1 spider, but that was my only mobility unit. But really focusing down on having lots of armor and guns is a strategy that you can use, or you can build a fast flanker list and go the opposite way. Now, the MRC doesn't really allow this because it limits the number of units that you're allowed to take to 6, but you can absolutely build a list with 10 locusts and 5 spiders, and it's going to be around the same battle value as like a lance of Battlemasters. And then you've got tons of initiative sinks, you've got way more units on the field. Now, of course, each unit's going to crumple as soon as it gets hit by anything serious, but you have so much mobility that you can accomplish objectives really easily, and there's not really a lot that the enemy can do to tie you down. I think that overall, if you want a flexible lance that's capable of dealing with multiple different scenarios, building your force so that it has this sort of central idea to it. It might have different elements like the Battlemaster and an Atlas and a Wolverine, and then a couple of scout mechs like a Spider and a Locust. But overall, you have a balanced force. Overall, you can build a balanced force, or you can try and weight things towards one side, like taking an all VTOLs list, for example. Again, something that is banned by the MRC because VTOLs are extremely annoying to deal with. They also limit high mobility units like 7 jumping spiders because, again, having too many high mobility units on the field, you can get outflanked a little bit too easily. They tend to try and keep things more towards this end of things, but from what I've seen, a lot of people end up more on this side, because if you're not allowed to exploit this, then you gotta exploit this. So I hope that gives you all a better sort of understanding of some of the core types of mechs that you have and what people are talking about when they talk about this triangle, this way that mechs are balanced. Thanks for watching the Mech Lab, and I hope you have a great day.